the reason I've done it this way, or the title is this, is because when people talk of climate change, generally it's a lot about figures. It's about carbon emission, tons of carbon. It's about, how many degrees will affect what, how much the sea level rises, even numbers of people. But it doesn't always relate to the people whose lives are affected. And I would like to come back to that, to the fact that it is about real lives. I mean, Bangladesh has used to have about 700 to 800 rivers because of mismanagement and many other reasons. Many of them have died, but even so, there are well over 400 rivers across Bangladesh. 58 international rivers pass through Bangladesh to go to the Bay of Bengal. So rivers form a very central part of what our lives are about. And I'll go to a pretty picture. I think we see all these terrible pictures about climate change and whatever. It's a bit nice if we show pictures which are different anyway. This is in the coastal area of Bangladesh, a woman playing with her grandchild. Nice picture in itself. How is it significant? As I said, it was in the coastal area, and those are the areas which are most damaged, where people are most damaged by it. I know so very many people who have lost their homes several times in their lifetime, sometimes, because the river has, I say sea because our rivers are sometimes like seas. You will see that later. Just engulfs their homes, they get displaced, new land comes up, sometimes they get a chance to go there, but then there is a power struggle, and often the weakest get left out, and it's complete pauperization for many people because of climate change, because of the river. Oops, that was my alarm telling me things go wrong. Now, the reason I showed that last picture was because when that happened after Cyclone Sidr, many of the people, the men at that part of the country, left the country in search of work. I mean, they had to keep on earning. So the people I was at that time documenting had gone to Libya. And then there was the conflict in Libya itself. So the same people who paid manpower agents so much to go out there and were struggling to send money back home suddenly were in risk of dying themselves and were scattered. Some came back, some died. But that's the sort of thing that happened. But not everyone went to the Middle East. Some went to the Maldives, which is what this picture is about. And now the Maldives doesn't have that sort of a conflict, but it is a country that is even more prone to climate change or risks of climate change than other places. So this is the dilemma that many people find themselves in. They live in a place which is very vulnerable, but often it's jumping from the frying pan to the fire. But let me give you a sense of what the terrain is. You know that Bangladesh is a flat land. How flat? This gives you a sense of what's happening. You can see the clods of earth nearby, which would get broken up on a regular basis. So every day there will be some aspect, some more land taken away, and perhaps some happening elsewhere. But this is a daily occurrence to many Bangladeshis. So this is Nijumdip. It's called the Island of Silence. It's an island in the Bay of Bengal. Now, it's interesting to note that this is not flooding. This is high tide. It takes place twice a day, every day. And people have to live with it. This is part of their lives. So people are very adaptable. They get on with it. Even situations like this are things that they've learned to live with. They get along with it. But often the bigger shifts that take place because of human intervention in other ways, sometimes because of what is called development. And these are the people who have to suffer from it. I'll move on to the Sundarbans. The Sundarbans is the world's largest mangrove forest. It's a UNESCO heritage site. But remember, I was telling you about how human intervention makes a difference. Well, coal-fired power plants are being built on the edge of the Sundarbans, completely illegal. It cannot happen. But there's lots of money involved. And of course, there's international politics involved. So it's quite interesting that while India is stopping, Indian courts consider coal-fired power plants to be damaging to India and has forbidden it. They're fine with India exporting coal to Bangladesh and fueling coal-fired power plants in Bangladesh, even in these areas like the Sundarbans. This is, by the way, where you still have some of the big old tigers. It has an incredible and complex ecosystem, but that's being eroded. And of course, alongside that, there are many other things, real estate and other things. So there are areas around the Sundarbans where property has been marked out to rich estate agents and things like that. But what happens to the people who get displaced? This is after the 1991 cyclone. This is in Hatia, and you get a sense of what a home is for some of these people. They've lost their home and made a home in this rickety place, and it's not only is it so vulnerable and barren, entire families have sometimes to live in places like this. So that is the reality of many people's existence. But I'll move on because I mentioned that human intervention is a big part of the story. This picture was taken on the 30th of October 2002 in Strasbourg, Saint-Denis, a very well-known street in Paris. It was bitterly cold when I was there, and there was this Bangladeshi worker who was sleeping on the side street on this road, just barely with enough cloth to cover part of his body. He was barefoot. You could see that, you know, his feet were charred in this manner almost. But that's the life they lead. Yet Bangladesh makes a lot of its money from the remittance given by migrant workers, by what they send back, by what they eke out. They live very frugally, save what they can, send money back home, and that how Bangladeshi wealthy people make money. Who are they? How wealthy are they? It gives you a sense. This is the feet of a migrant worker. Watch the feet of a manpower agent. This is Musa bin Shamsher. He calls himself Prince Musa. And it is said that the diamonds in his shoes are worth $3 million. He's said to do many things, including be involved in arms trade. He personally told me that he was a collaborator of Khashoggi and used to provide, be a major arms dealer. But when I visited his office, I also see these huge bundles of passports. And I've known since then, through my research, that he actually, he has, construction companies and other things, and he takes Bangladeshi workers and exploits them in these places. But that's not very uncommon. That is often the plight of the people we're talking about. So what happens during these situations? Um, this woman, I photographed her in 1988. Now, we don't always know if it's climate change, in the sense that, not every ecological disaster is necessarily about climate change. There are things that happen as part of a natural cycle. We have had our fair share of floods and cyclones and tidal waves and things, but it's the frequency with which these are now happening that makes us realize that there is certainly a shift taking place. So I photographed her in 1988, and it was told then that this was the worst flood in a century. She was on a rooftop trying to get on with her life, trying to feed her family. The day after I took this photograph, I went back to find her. The water had risen another 3 feet. She was nowhere to be found. I do not to this day know what has ever happened to her, but I suspect she's somewhere else, cooking for her family, trying to survive as best as she can. And this is what we need to recognize, what it means to the people on the ground. When we give all this theory and we find ways to deny obvious truths, when we take money because major oil companies sponsor research, sponsor position papers, and respected scholars pitch the version of the oil companies, often without any declaration of their conflict of interest. This is slightly different. It's a Rohingya girl. Now, obviously, you know the Rohingya situation. What you might not realize is how old the Rohingya situation is. I took this picture in 1992, and the families had come. There was a camp there as well. Now there are well over 1 million people, million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. And they, in order to survive, they try and eke out a living the best as they can. And this little girl is trying to get drinking water, very precious, by digging a little well from which she can just get a tiny amount of water. But there are many trees in those areas which have been cut down for firewood, for space, and many other reasons. And these also make large, long-term shifts to our ecosystem, which often are entirely man-made. And here we have a situation where, while this is grotesque and need to be challenged, our neighbors, India and China, are very pally with Myanmar. They have business interests with Myanmar and will block our attempts to bring justice to the Rohingyas. So let's move on to something else. I mean, the intervention is not merely because of political reason or business reason, but also from development. This is the Mundal family. Again, they're in, this picture was taken in a place called Parmodakali, again in the coastal region. They were agrarian farmers, and the World Bank came up with a dictum, if you like, that the country had to go into, had to take up shrimp farming, because that was in vogue, that was going to bring in money, and that was what they demanded. Now, agrarian farmers didn't have a choice. Shrimp farms are not things individual farmers can do. They need big money. The bigger land, the people who own the shrimp farms flood the land with salt water, making it impossible for them to farm there, which is what also happened to this family. But the figures were interesting because one of the things that the World Bank touted was the fact that people would earn more from shrimp farming to agrarian farming. And on the face of it, it seemed to be right. I asked them how much they earned, and they did earn a little bit more than what they earned before as farmers. So I asked them, well, how come, why are you worried about this? And they gave a very interesting answer, something that never enters the debate. They said, you know, when we were farmers, we had cattle, we had geese, we had chicken, we had a vegetable patch, we grew our own rice, we had fruit trees. The only things we needed to buy were cloth and oil. Today, we need to buy everything. There is the added problem, and that is that there is no land here. So the marketplace where they would buy those resources are not there. They go to a neighboring village where there is a hut, which is a weekly marketplace, once a week. Of course, they don't have a fridge, so they buy what they can. They have fresh food for 1 or 2 days, and then the food gradually gets stale, and towards the end of the week they have nothing, and then wait till the next time they will buy food. But that's their life. But for me, what was more stark was the fact that being farmers, they were very close to their cattle. A cow meant a lot to them, and while they really had no need for a cow, they couldn't part with their cows. This picture shows a cow looking for grazing land. So the farmers have to send their cattle to neighboring villages to graze because there's no grass for the cattle where they are. And that for me was very poignant. To me, it sort of epitomized what it meant. This barren landscape with not a blade of grass, at one forlorn cow looking for grazing land, in a sense, summed up what had happened here, and what the World Bank had successfully propagated to my country and our elite. These are climate refugees crossing the river. You can see the river back there. Our rivers are huge. I remember many years ago, a friend of mine, Paddy McGuinness, he was showing me the Battle of Boyne in Ireland. And we were walking along, and I sort of asked him after a while, so where's this River Boyne? And he said, we crossed it. I hadn't even realized it was some street, you know, a little trickle of water or something of that sort. I mean, that could be called a river. Then this is what I know to be rivers. But of course, these rivers are what they have to navigate, cross over. This river gives them life, but this river also takes away life. And that's what they live in. But the next picture will show you better what the river looks like. Yeah, that is a river. And of course, when this happens, every time they lose their home, they have very little, but with those little things, they pack up, move to a new place, start life anew. And that is how they live. They've learned to cope with that, and that is their reality. And when climate change makes this that much more frequent, when climate change is that much more destructive, when climate change takes away lives that much more frequently, it affects people's lives in a very different way from merely the figures we talk about. This too, again in Nijumdeep, they've just set up a temporary home. And these are people who are not on any census. As far as the government is concerned, they don't actually exist. So they're not entitled to benefits. If they died, no one would know. If something happened to them, no one would care. And that's the situation they find themselves in. I'm going to take a little bit of time to move closer to home. When I say home, I'm talking of the city in Bangladesh. I mean, I've shown you largely rural areas, And I'm showing you this because, as I mentioned, the vested interests are very, very powerful, and often decisions that are made completely against all laws, but powerful people get away with it. Laws don't apply to them in the same way. So this building that you see belonged to the Bangladesh Garment Owners Association. It's a 15-story building. Now, the land that it's on is reclaimed land built in the middle of a waterway, which is completely illegal. There's a Supreme Court directive that you cannot fill up these water bodies. You certainly cannot build on it. And in no way is this permitted. But a 15-story building went up, apparently without planning permission. And no one saw it going up. One prime minister inaugurated the project. There was a change of government. You'd have thought the new government would then have found problem with this, but no, the BGME is so powerful that all prime ministers are beholden to them, or try and keep them happy. And of course, many of our members of parliament are garment owners themselves, so who will challenge them? And they're the ones who make the laws. Though in this particular case, the law itself does deliberately prohibit this. So despite two prime ministers having it being under the watch of these two prime ministers, this unplanned, unpermitted 15-story building went up. Really, there was nothing to be done. What we did, we decided we would find our own way to try and stop it. So we had been working on the garment movement for a long time. We set up something called the No More campaign, which, as the name suggests, are things that we should not tolerate in our society anymore. And so what we did was, I took this picture and made it into a billboard and set it up in front of the garment, in front of the building itself, on the street in front of the building. And there we did lots of things. I mean, the first time we did it was after Tazreen fashion, when the garment factory fire had taken place. So we had a banner with the carcass of the building. Later, we had this picture in a banner and put it up there again. When we did it for the garment fire, we actually had a performance out there. We did all sorts of things. And we found that the government had sent a reception committee for us. So this armored vehicle came over to tackle protesters, protesting about this building, about the rights of garment workers, about environmental issues. One can't really say that our government doesn't give us much attention. I mean, how many of you for an art event have had reception of this sort? It's a feather in my cap, I suppose, that we have something of this sort. But the reality is, this is the message that's given out. These are people who cannot be touched. You cannot even protest about them. Very recently, there had been a conflict in another power plant, coal-fired power plant, and 7 workers were killed, many were injured. An engineer had posted on Facebook about what had happened, and he was taken to jail because he was tarnishing the image of the company. So doing what they do is not a problem. But the minute one of us complains about it or points to it, then we become guilty of tarnishing the image of the nation and the image of these companies. So the next time when we did this, we were better prepared. We knew what happened. So, of course, I do this quite often anyway. I'd actually set up my classes outside You know, you can see the billboard. This is a different billboard. Um, um, you can, so I'm taking my outdoor classes in front of this building. And I do that quite often. I mean, my classes are very much lived experience, and I involve my students in the activism, in the intervention. So it's not a theoretical exercise in terms of what we do or what we say, but it's a lived experience. But there is a practical outcome of this as well. I mean, while the government can find an obtuse justification for shutting down protesters, the fact that a respected professor is taking outdoor classes for a group of international students is a little bit more problematic to shut down in the same sort of way. And I say this because you know, we work in very many different ways, and I think one of the things we need to remember is that at the end of the day, we need to be pragmatic. We need to choose our battles. We need to find ways in which we can intervene, and we need to stay relevant. I mean, it doesn't always work. Where I'm sitting right now is where I was uploading pictures from on the 5th of August 2018, when I got picked up. I got picked up, I got arrested, I got tortured, I spent 107 days in incarceration. They refused me bail 5 times. I was given bail on the 6th. I'm still out on bail. The case still hangs over me, and I still potentially face 14 years in prison. So obviously that's not what you want to do. But I think you need to be pushing all the time. And in pushing, you need to find ways where you create wriggle room for yourself, where you find ways to make it more difficult, where you make repression more expensive. And I say this because there are many people who tell me today that activism doesn't really work. It doesn't achieve what it's meant to, and why take the risk? And it's true, there are very distinct risks, particularly there are many people who went to jail because they shared my Facebook posts and things like that. And my friend Mushtaq Ahmed, the writer, died in jail recently. The cartoonist Kishore was tortured. He's out, but he has huge physical and mental problems. And those are some of the things we need to deal with. But as we deal with it, we also need to develop alliances, strategies, and adapt our methodology to make it difficult for these repressive places. And I will end with a picture which hopefully you will take encouragement from. So you saw that 15-story building, and despite the fact that the Supreme Court had wanted the building to come down, it just wasn't happening. They were happy to ignore the Supreme Court directives, and who was going to challenge them? But though it took a very long time, here we are, and this is that 15-story building, which has now been demolished completely to the ground. And I think that that is one of the things that we do need to remember, the fact that activism does work or can work, and not all the time. I mean, there will be failures. There will be many failures. There will be disappointments. You will go down the wrong track. Sometimes you'll get into trouble. But I think provided you're smart, provided you're tenacious, provided you build the network, you work with people who will support you when the shit hits the fan, there are times when you do get successes, and those successes are worth it. So I'll end there, I think.